Some of us are becoming the men we wanted to marry. Gloria Steinem.
You're listening to the Coached Podcast, hosted by Coach Karen Eldad, world-class personal and executive coach. It's your show. We answer your questions, and you get coached on any issue that concerns you. Here's Coach Karen.
Hey there, superstars. This is Coach Karen. Welcome to a new episode of Coached. I'm your host, Coach Karen, and today's episode is a very special edition in which we're going to go off format to enjoy a panel discussion. The question that was submitted for today's show is such a big matzo ball that I've invited major pros to join me for a conversation that addresses a topic pertinent not only to your mindset, but to a cultural moment and all my observations at work at this time. And in this one, we're going to be talking about women. Women, why you must rise to the top, why you can rise to the top, and at least why you must consider, if you have left, rejoining the workforce and creating an empire. As always, if you love today's episode, please head over to the Apple Store, give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps a lot. And if this is your first time listening to the Coached Podcast, welcome. I promise we're going to make you feel right at home. Now, here's why this has been on my mind, why women have been on my mind. You know, if you've been listening to the show for a while or you've been following me for a while, you know that I've trained hundreds of high achievers, men and women, to reach greater heights in their life and in their work. And until this year, I've always been pretty equal, right? Equally focused, men and women. But then in the COVID year, following the mass exodus of the US workforce, seeing talented, driven women, over 900,000 of which left in 1 month alone, the month of September 2020, I started to feel an inner call to arms. This exodus really bugs me. Again and again, I started to feel and I started to hear more and more from you and experiencing through the women I coach and work with. I felt that they were facing specific and very different roadblocks from men as they were advancing in their careers, especially in light of a pandemic. And even before that, because as a result of the systemic issues that were probably facing women in contrast to men, in a year like a pandemic year, it was no wonder that they were the ones who ended up making the sacrifice, not only of their paycheck, but in many cases of their own self-actualization of things they love. I believe that these roadblocks are avoidable. And so is the exodus. I don't think that it has to be a tit for tat. I've seen it enough times to know that it isn't. Pulling back and quitting and making yourself small, anything that makes you feel not very good, like our first caller today. None of these make sense for the overachieving woman determined to rise. And I know that that's the kind of person listening to the Coach Podcast. If this is you, if you've been struggling with that decision, the aftermath of that decision, you need to overcome this with a new mindset. That's a different way of thinking, not with tactics, just a new way of looking at things. Simply put, as Marshall Goldsmith once said, what got you here won't get you there. You got to up level. And I want to help you to get there. And to do this, today's conversation brings you two brilliant female leaders and leadership experts to get anyone out there feeling the onset of the tug of compromise or the pangs of regret or the feeling that they're just stunted and they don't have many options to get back into the domain of, yes, I am in charge of my life. To kick off this episode, here is the special question that instigated all of this. Here's Amanda from Connecticut. Go ahead, Amanda. I'm listening.
Hi, Coach Karen. I've always been a career woman and I've loved my business. I've built it from the ground up for the past 10 years. But when the pandemic happened and my business, which was already not earning as much as my husband's job, dried up, I held on. But by September, with the trouble getting my kids back to school, we just did a basic calculation of who earns what. And I ended up thinking that it's logical that I give up my work to support the family. It's been 6 months and I'm miserable. Seeing all those brilliant women out there doing it and rocking life, I just feel like I can't do that with no form of support.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for that honest and brave question. I'm sure you're going to find tremendous value in what comes next because, like I said, I'm not just going to be the one answering your question. The people discussing the question today are the big guns. Let's go right to our panel. Please join me in welcoming today's two superstar guests. First, from San Francisco, we have Lindsay Costigan, Head of Finance Sales at BNP Paribas. And from Paris, France, we have Agathe Benhamou, the founder of the Women's Society. Welcome to you both from side to side of the globe. I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen. Thank you. Good to be here.
Oh, it's so good to have you. It's so good to have you. So let's talk about this. How do you see the situation right now? What are some observations you've made or experienced? Let's start with you, Lindsay.
It is tough out there. It's tough. It's tough to be at home. It's tough to be living at work. I completely understand the question that was called in. Every single day is a challenge, and every single day is different. And I think it's a matter of trying to figure out ways to find the balance, and also to set boundaries inside the home with your children and with your spouse, your partner, and also with work. And holding to those boundaries has been something that's very helpful to me this year. I think the other thing too, in listening to the question, is we are there to, or it's important to be a positive influence to our children. And so showing, or being able to show them that we are setting boundaries, and that it's okay to push back. It's okay to say no to them, to work, but it's also okay to say yes, and find, kind of delineate between work and not work. Whether you're working in the home or you're working in a job outside the home, but from home potentially, really standing up for yourself and setting boundaries, and being a good influence
Absolutely.
for
And I
your
know you're
children.
speaking from experience there, right?
Absolutely. All day, every day.
Lindsay is a mother of two very young children. And as I mentioned, a big superstar herself. So yeah, it's been a trying year. I'm sure you're seeing it all around you. Thank you for sharing that. Guys, what do you think? What do you think this exodus is all about? Is the system rigged against women in Paris too?
Yes, it's the same here. And here we have two types of women that gave birth during this pandemic. You have the women that work in companies that still had to work, good for them, but they still had to work, and they still had to take care of the children. So they worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they were exhausted, and they still are exhausted because they do so many jobs. And you have another type of women that own their companies, that had to leave everything, no more money, no more job, just taking care of the children like 100 years ago, and that feel very bad. So those two types of women are feeling very bad, and they need to rebirth again, and to fight over and over and more over to show people, and to show our society that they can't stay on the other side of the road. They need to leave. They need to live again, and to find another way of proving that they exist.
Absolument. I just want to say, Lindsay and I both read the same article, which I know because we text a lot on Instagram. As do we, Agathe. This is my favorite way of talking to people today. And for once, we weren't texting back and forth cat memes. We were actually talking about substantive stuff. The New York Magazine edition of last week published a piece by Hannah Rosen, who in 2012 wrote a book called, I think, The End of the End of the End of Men, right? I think so. And she was saying how glib she was, how naive she was to think that we were always at an advantage and we were truly moving to the cusp. Let's be clear about what's happening here. First, I want to echo what Lindsay and Agathe are saying, and say with the numbers, we have moved back since September to 1988 levels of employment for women. When I was a small child, there were more women in the workforce than now. This is absolutely bananas. The second thing I want to echo is, like Agathe, I am also from a traditional Jewish home background with parents who were a little bit more interested in my marrying well and having children than in having my own business. When you find yourself so conditioned this way, and suddenly the path appears before you, well, should I stay or should I go? Should I take route A or route B? These things actually do start tugging at you again. And what we're making the real case for is you know what you really want. We've come too far. So hopefully this talk is about getting everybody back on track to move forward and not back to the 80s because there was a lot wrong with the 80s, except for the music, of course. Can I ask you, Agathe, what resonated with you about Amanda's question? Why does this matter to you specifically?
Oh, so specifically because I was there 1 year ago when the pandemic arrived, and I was a wedding planner. I have been a wedding planner for 10 years. And when the school closed, I got home with my husband that was working a lot. Didn't ask me any question about my job. Do you have something to do? Do you need to have some time for you? No, nothing. It didn't exist. My job disappeared like in 1 second. So I was home with my 2 children, my husband working, and I totally forgot myself. I forgot my life. I was only a mom cooking and taking care of the kids. And 1 month after, I told myself that if I didn't do something, I would become crazy, really crazy. So I called you, Karen, and I'm so glad you were there. And I found I found myself again with hard work on myself, and thanks to you. And well, I built the Women's Society, and I promised myself that if the pandemic would last, that I would never, never, never do this again and never forget myself. Because when you forget yourself, people forget you, people don't care about you, and you feel sad and you feel bad, and your family is bad, and because you are the one that brings the light in your house, and if you don't feel good, nobody feels good, and you need to stop feeling guilty. That's what you say. You need to think about yourself, and you need not to forget yourself. And in those type of moments, you realize that all the work that has been done by those amazing women for the past years can be forgotten like this in 1 second. And it's so sad, and it brings you in a time that, well, where my grandmother lived, and it's not normal, and nobody cares. And even like you say, your parents are happy. They're happy. They're like, okay, she's at home with the children. It's cool. It's her life. Okay, she doesn't have any problem. The husband is working. She's cool. But no, we don't want that anymore. And you see, just the COVID arrived and everything disappeared.
Absolutely. It's almost as if the system was not designed to support us to begin with. I really appreciate what you just said. It was received, by the way, with gratitude and love. And I want you to talk to Amanda in just a few seconds about what exactly she can do to reclaim herself and to put that oxygen mask on first before serving anybody else. Because if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Lindsay, I can see in your face that this is resonating with you profoundly. What about this situation matters to you? And do you think that the system has been rigged all along?
I do, and I could spend, I feel like, hours talking about the topic. I think I'm very visual, and I think about my life and balance or balancing, and kind of three, like a triangle, if you will, and each point of the triangle is something different. So wife, mother, and executive. And I think in the executive bucket, that's kind of what you do for yourself. Like Agathe was saying, that piece is most important. Now, it's very hard. There's so much pressure, and I can see why Agathe and others feel that pressure, and something has to break during the pandemic, especially with giving up the work or your work outside the home to stay at home. And it's really hard to keep that balancing act between the three of those things. And it's something I think about all day, every day. It's not balance, it's balancing. And some days you might be 100% mother and 0% wife and 0% executive, but it can go in the opposite direction. It's just kind of keeping the flow between those three things with regularity has been something that I've been really working on and struggling with myself. But I think the system is rigged against us. But also, I think that there's a few things we tend to do it for ourselves, because many of us as women are perfectionists and believe that our husbands can't do the grocery shopping the right way, or put the diaper on the right way. And I think it's about gratitude for them being able to do that. Put the diaper in the head, I don't care, you say thank you. And I think just enabling ourselves to outsource that a little bit is super helpful, and actually outsource as much as you can has been something that I've been really trying to do. But also, the system is rigged from a pay perspective. I mean, think about even rewinding 30, 40, 50 years, or even 6 months. And if women are making 50 cents on the dollar, 80 cents on the dollar, whatever that number is from far back, how do we get to that moment when the decision has to be made as far as who's stepping back in their career, so that someone can, if they can watch the children, the other person can keep going. If women are always paid less, they're never going to be the one that's staying working when that decision needs to be made. And this actually hits very close to home for me. It's my parents divorced when I was young, but prior to that, my father was a fireman and my mom works in financial services. And they had a similar moment where my father said to my mother, "You make less money than me. You should stop working and stay home with the kids, because our childcare expense is more than you're bringing in." She was new in her career, and she said to him, "But think about my growth trajectory. In 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, I'm going to be making twice what you make. Let's talk about that." And so this would have been in the late 80s, and she had to really stand up for herself. And she, of course, stayed working. They ended up having other differences and separating, but that was definitely a hard fight to fight. And she fought it, and she's still working today at the age of 74.
God bless her. What an inspiration Mrs. Raymar is. A big shout out to your mama, a pioneer. That's a big conversation to have, and that's a big matzo ball of a conversation, because I just want to break that apart a little bit and say, look, as a coach, I have observed the triangle, and I've also observed that for men, they can stay at one tip of the triangle at a time. For the most part, we are not making generalizations. And we have not been afforded this luxury societally. It's just simply not the way it is. Also, pay has a very long way to go. Now, today's show, like all coaching, is not about banging on and on about the problem. It's about looking towards the solution, because we all have a lot of power here. Every woman speaking on today's podcast has chosen to rise and has risen. So we want to talk to you about what you can do. What you can do, not lay down and say, "I guess this is the situation. Let's go back to that time." But how can we move forward? So I want to start with you, Lindsay, this time, and say, hearing what Amanda said on that very poignant, very honest, very brave question, what would you say to her, aside from telling her that remarkable story about your mother?
It's tough. It's a tough question to answer. I think the most important thing, like I said a little bit ago, is to be a good example for your children and whatever your work is, and also find your space to be you, because that's what your kids will remember throughout this time period, and that's what you will require to maintain your sanity, and that's what you will remember throughout this time period as well, is always find ways to come back to yourself and know that there is a way to re-enter the workforce. I think setting boundaries and setting up a path forward for yourself, and being about what you need to be happy, and really holding true to your values would be what I would say to her.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, Lindsay, because what you're talking about is not just a systemic rig, something that's external. We're talking about an internal rig, an internal blockage. Many women, I really believe this to this day, when I say you have to put yourself first. You have to take the time to close your office door and focus on what you want to do. No, I can't. There's a mommy going on outside. You have to, because you hear what Agathe said earlier today. You cannot serve another person when you are at half capacity. You cannot serve another person when you are depleted, and you certainly cannot serve from sacrifice. Martyr syndrome, not a good thing. So what do you think, Lindsay, is happening? What's the block? Is it internal doubt? Is it a form of imposter syndrome?
Maybe. Maybe. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but that's really, really interesting.
Maybe we should all think a little bit about what work is about. Maybe we should start thinking about the fact that we're not asking you to just go back to a 9 to 5 that you hate. I understand if you don't want to go back to that. That's cool. But every single one of us living in the era of Instagram, self actualization, creating something of my life and of myself in this finite time space reality. When we have to compromise that, sacrifice that, or align ourselves with the values of others to our one precious life, that is a sacrifice that is enormous. And the only way you would willingly really make that is if you do not believe that you are worth more. When we start to understand what we deserve and start to really stand up for it, the system problems, I promise you, they start to slowly melt away. There's living proof on today's episode. I encourage everyone to check out Agathe and Lindsay, who will let you know how to contact them or follow them after today's episode. And if you wanted to learn more, but I also recommend that everybody read books like Equal Pay, which I think is one of the awesome books that Lindsay perhaps somehow alluded to, which is outsource as much as you can. For some reason, it's called Fair Play, right? I don't remember her name, but I'll definitely put the name of the book in the show notes. Read books like You Are a Badass. Read anything like Untamed by Glennon Doyle, anything that wakes you up to who divinely you are and what you can rise to. Agathe, would you agree with that? What do you think is there an invisible problem that we have to discuss too today?
Yeah, I think that we put too much pressure on us. As you said, the men are on the top of the triangle and they do one thing at a time. We believe that we should be able to do everything. As said Lindsay, being a mom, being a wife, being an executive. And you know what I think we should do? We should start trusting men a little bit more. So we have less pressure and we can do what we like and leave them a little bit, for example, with the children. I'm going to give you an example. Yeah, I am learning to be a coach like you, Karen. And it's on Tuesday evenings. So I need to leave the kids and go into my office and do as I'm not home. A few years ago, I would have taken a babysitter because I didn't trust my husband. And I put pressure on myself like I was alone. So this year I told him, no matter what, I don't care about your job. I don't care what you will do, but every Tuesday night, you're going to be home and you're going to take care of the children because I have something to build. So we should trust people that can help us, even if like the woman said in the question, well, take a nanny, don't wait for people, go ahead and don't make like you are a magician. You only are a human being. You can't do, and you don't have to do everything.
You don't have to do everything. Powerful, powerful advice. I could not agree with you more. Lindsay, is there any other solution that you've found to help women get back out there and rock their awesome life?
Find happiness. Do what makes you happy, even in the little ways. That extra cup of coffee, the glass of wine, go for a walk. Find your happiness, find your way back to yourself, and the path will become clear.
This is so true. And by the way, it's almost impossible to walk away from something that makes you feel alive. It would be so much harder. You know, when 900,000 women left the workforce, I had the thought, look, I got to be honest with you. If one person, two people even in my circle said, hey, I'm peacing out, I wouldn't even flinch. But when a million women walk out at the same time, I got to believe it's not that popular. It's just that the trade-off is not a real trade-off. So you got to make it a real trade-off. You have to stand up for what you really, really want. I want to thank my guests, Agathe and Lindsay, so much for joining me from all over the world today. That was such a great talk. I'm deeply, deeply thankful for the open and honest conversation. I want to help you all walk away with the real meaning of today's conversation. It's the meaning of work. It's the very reason any of this kind of conversation matters. And believe it or not, it's not a political affiliation or anything like that. I'm not going to talk about the benefits to society. I'm just going to talk about the benefits for you, the listener. It's self-actualization. That's it. That's the benefit. Self-actualization is the bomb diggity. It is the realization of the fulfillment of your talent and potential in this lifetime, which is not forever. It's an emotional state that has been identified by Maslow, the same guy who identified human needs like house and water. At the very tippy top of that pyramid, yes, another triangle in today's conversation. I want you all to consider that careers and jobs have been more than what you've asked for. They are not paychecks. And you know what? I know that you're specifically not attacking just an economic decision, but basically, if this did resonate with you, even if it pissed you off, especially, by the way, if it made you angry, just know that it's because you're awakening, and it's most likely triggering you because you want to rise. And we're here to tell you there's literally no reason not to. There is a universe of women like me, like Lindsay, like Agathe, who are wrapping our hands around you from around the globe and cheering for your awesomeness. That's today's episode, everybody. If you loved today's special episode, please head over to the Apple Store, give us a 5-star rating and a review. It makes a world of difference. Thank you so much for joining me today. A special extra thanks to our guests. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining Coach Karen. Would you like to have your questions answered on a future episode? Visit KarenEldad.com, KEREN Eldad.com, and tell us about your challenge or issue. Until next time, live with enthusiasm.